Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 15 of season 3 of The Walking Dead called This Sorrowful Life. And this is a surprisingly slow and of course very somber episode. This is our big Merle episode. Merle's been a character who's obviously had some really nice moments this season, but here's the real meditation on Merle episode, as I like to think of it. And it starts off in a really cool way where Rick Merle's looking to get high, and Rick even says to him, "Do you do you know why you do what it is you do?" And ultimately, Merle even admits later on in the episode that he doesn't. He doesn't know why he does the things that he does. And this just rings so true, not just for Merle as a character, because really that perfectly does sum up Merle in so many ways, but just in real life. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've run into in life who just seem to not know how to not screw up their lives, and not just do incredibly stupid things, make constant bad decisions. And I've looked at those folks and really tried to understand why it is they do what they do. Now, sometimes for various reasons, incidents and things from their past, sometimes I do understand why it is that they did certain things. But a lot of time, I'm just left scratching my head. Now, granted, I can't read minds. I only know about people from looking at them from the outside. But even in that case, I've seen so many people who do things like Merle, and even occasionally I've asked them, like, why did you do that? And you'd be surprised the number of times the answer has been, I don't know. And you know what? That is something. It's not just the tragedy of this episode that makes the title of this episode fitting. This Sorrowful Life. Personally, while tragedy is inevitable in everyone's life, but to go through life and not even really understand why it is you're doing what you're doing with your own life, to me, that is truly a tragedy. Now, I'm a believer in the examined life, where you stop and you look at your life and you think, well, about the decisions that you made that led you there, about your feelings about your situation, where you just and really use that to guide you. And then there are folks out in the world who don't believe in that. They just sort of do whatever, for lack of a better term. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have all the answers. I mean, I've certainly done my share of stupid things, made bad decisions, even done things sometimes when even I didn't really know why I did them. But at the end of the day, I've found that if you go through life and sometimes just really stop and take stock of what it is you're doing with your life, you'll fare a lot better than just flailing from one thing to another, doing whatever. And, well, Merle is a pretty interesting example of that whole dichotomy right here. Because here, in this episode, is where Merle really does take some time to look at his life, at the decisions that he's made. And it's pretty obvious he's not happy with those decisions. Merle, in the early part of this episode, remarks on how Carol has changed since he met her in the camp outside of Atlanta. He calls her a little mouse, scared of her own shadow, and Carol points out that she was actually just scared of her husband, and now she's not scared of anything. And even Merle recognizes that strength within Carol. Calls her a late bloomer. And it's interesting that Carol, showing some really perceptive thinking going on there, says to Merle, well, you might be a late bloomer too. And that really is a very apt way of putting what it is we see with Merle this episode. As I said, Merle does take that time to really look at his life, at the decisions he's made, and makes the decision to try and do the right thing, to sacrifice himself. Because make no mistake, Merle knew he was going on a suicide run. But he was doing that, well, obviously to protect Daryl. But in some ways, I think Merle was doing that just to once in his life really do something good with his life. Do something for others. To earn himself some small bit of redemption. Michonne really does really get inside Merle's head, because Michonne's a very, very observant person. And she says to him at that one point, when Merle's kind of been going on about how he's an evil person, he's killed 16 men because of the governor, Michonne sees us right through him. She even points out to him, like, you know what, you'd never killed anybody before you met the governor. And you carry that. Merle carries the things that he's done with him. And it's a burden. It's a heavy, heavy burden. And she even rightly points out that truly evil people, they don't do that. They're, as she's put it, light as a feather. And look at the governor. Look at the way that man walks. Purpose, confidence. Nothing weighs that man down. Now, granted, the governor does have his share of emotional problems. But do you think he feels any guilt about the things he's done, the people he's killed, the lies he's told? Nope. Do you think Merle did? I do. I think he felt those things a lot. We've talked in these reviews quite a bit about how, the governor is sort of evil Rick. And for a long time, people were like saying, well, Merle was evil Daryl. But really, it's not that. It's more complicated with those two. Sure, Merle is something that Daryl could have become. But Daryl's also something that Merle could have become. As I've said, I really like these recent episodes since he joined up with the group, where we've really gotten to see these different sides of Merle. That there's a much more intelligent and thinking and complicated man under what's basically on the surface just look like a racist asshole redneck. I mean, look at several episodes ago when Merle was talking with Herschel and was able to quote the Bible with extreme fluency. And I talked about how maybe at some point in his life Merle had tried to use religion to find some direction. And, well, even his interactions with Michonne, he ultimately does make the decision. I mean, that's really where it all starts to turn around for Merle, is when he makes the decision to let Michonne go. And, of course, this all doesn't work out. The governor wins the absolutely brutal fight. I mean, that was pretty badass. I mean, he bit off a couple of Merle's fingers. I mean, man, Merle and hands are just not a good combination, huh? And then, of course, there's the supreme tragedy that it's Daryl that finds zombie Merle munching on some poor guy's body. It has to be the one that puts him down. That is literally the worst thing in the world that could have happened to Daryl. The absolute worst thing in the world that could have happened to Daryl. Worse than dying, worse than getting bit, is having to kill Merle. And, man, poor Daryl ain't gonna have a whole lot of time to sit there and cry, because, well, odds are that fight made quite a bit of noise, so there's probably going to be some more walkers heading over there to try and take a piece out of him. But, in any case, to talk about Daryl a little more, I like how he's very obviously opposed to what they're planning to do with Michonne, but he's making that choice to go along with what Rick says, even though he clearly does not like and does not approve of it. He even kind of has those little goads at Rick where he points out that it was Michonne's idea to come up with those traps that could wreck tires. That's Daryl's subtle way of protesting what Rick is doing. But Daryl also recognizes that they've agreed to follow Rick's leadership. That Rick is probably going to be the guy who can get them out of this if anybody can. So Daryl is willing to make that sacrifice, that moral compromise, even as much as he doesn't like it. And it's also a credit to Daryl that when Rick changes his mind, he doesn't rub it in. He doesn't say, I told you so, or anything like that. He gives a subtle little bit of approval to Rick changing his mind, and then it's on to dealing with the situation at hand. So, yeah, small but very good Daryl moments. Let me see here. Oh yeah, and going back to talk about Merle, I like how he even sort of points out at one point how Rick is being a little bit of a hypocrite when it comes to handing over Michonne. They're willing to sacrifice people to do horrible and dirty things just for their own survival, and they're willing to have Merle be the guy they send out to do it. And Merle is making an absolutely excellent point. And this reminds me actually when he says that, and when he's having that conversation with Michonne about how basically he's evil. This was actually reminded me of all things, a line from the movie Scarface. Now, granted, there's some pretty serious differences between good old Merle and good old Tony Montana, but there are definitely more than a few parallels. And I'm reminded of actually one of my absolute favorite lines from Scarface, which is an absolutely freaking awesome movie. Al Pacino at his absolute best. But I want to share that line with you if you're not familiar with the movie. Let me call it up here. Whoops, I seem to have accidentally clicked away from that page. Okay, well, let me not do it word for word, but let me give you the gist of it. There's a part where Tony Montana goes to nightclub people. He basically says, people want somebody in the world they can point their fingers at and go, that's the bad guy. And in a way, Merle kind of sees himself as that. He's the guy that the group points their fingers at and said, okay, Merle's the bad guy. Merle's a bad person. We shouldn't be like Merle. Merle is evil. And yet, here they are. They're asking him to do the same thing. Rick is asking him to do the same thing the governor does. And Merle is willing to go out and do it. Now, the fact that he is willing to go out and do this under Rick, just like what he was doing under the governor, I think more than anything that really highlighted to Merle his choices in life. Why Merle believed that he was an evil person. But Merle also was a smart judge of character, just like Carol, and he even sees through Rick. He sees that Rick is ultimately just not going to be able to go through with this, and he even chides him, calls him officer friendly, which is a little bit of an interesting thing to think about considering all the stuff that we've seen Rick do. I mean, the fellow with the orange backpack from last episode sure as hell ain't going to think that Rick's no officer friendly. But ultimately, Rick is still a good man at heart. He is not willing to go that far. He is willing to set limits, to realize when he is wrong, to admit when he is wrong, and, most importantly, to relinquish control and power when it's clear that him being solely in charge is just not going to work. So, yeah, let me come back on that. And I do love the scene where Rick comes to that decision. It's wonderfully well done. You've got Herschel off with Beth and Maggie reading from the Bible. I looked it up. He's actually reading from Psalm 91. I'm not really a religious fellow, so I had to go and look that sort of thing up. But it is a very a fitting quote from the Bible for what's going on with that scene. And of course, we see Rick having visions of Laurie again. Laurie, who really was kind of morally a guiding light for Rick. Of course, considering all the BS that Laurie threw around in season 2, that seems a really strange thing to say in retrospect, but we're looking at this at how Rick sees Laurie, not how we, the audience, see Laurie. I mean, folks, I have not forgotten the feelings that many fans had about Laurie in season 2 and the feelings that I had, but the past is the past, right? Anyway. To bring it back to Merle one more time. I'm kind of going through my notes here, and I know I'm bouncing around a lot, but bear with me on that. One thing that I liked and Okay, let me start over again and express my point clearly and concisely. While he's dragging her off to the governor, Michonne says to Merle, you're gonna die, and not even Daryl is gonna miss you. Well, of course, ultimately, Michonne turns out to be completely and utterly wrong on that. But I don't really think that even she believed that. I think she was just saying what she thought would dig at Merle the most. And you have to think that after everything that's been going on, Merle really does have to wonder, where does he stand with Daryl? I mean, even in this time, he can't stop giving Daryl grief, giving Daryl a hard time. So, you really have to wonder, what is Merle thinking that Daryl thinks of him? What does Merle think will happen when he dies to Daryl? That line about Daryl having found a new family takes on a new light when you stop and think about how that must have been going through Merle's mind. And I do love that scene outside the liquor store where Merle's just sitting there in the car drinking, not even caring that the zombies are outside the car. That right there shows his absolute resignation that he's gonna die. And I love how there's no real words. You just look at that scene. You don't need anybody to tell you what Merle's thinking. You can put it all together yourself. That's good storytelling. And to kind of bring it into how things end, Rick relinquishing control of the group, bringing back true democracy. I like how he says, "We're the greater good." Now, I've talked about the dividing line in this post-apocalyptic world, about how people really do need to hang on to some semblance of morality, or they're just as much of monsters as the walkers. In fact, they're even worse in some way. Walkers are basically like animals. They're like sharks. Their purpose in life is to feed. But walkers, they don't feel hate, they don't feel anger, they don't feel jealousy. They're just hungry. They can't deliberately inflict cruelty any more than a shark is being deliberately cruel if it bites off some luckless surfer's leg. Okay? It's just an animal doing what it does. But guys like the governor, they can deliberately inflict cruelty. And it's a choice they have. And in a world like where things are like in The Walking Dead, the choice to do like that, it takes on a new level of just monstrousness. I'm reminded of that line that Charlie Chaplin had in The Great Dictator, where he says, "We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. Human beings are like that." And there's actually a lot more to the speech his character gives in that film, which is absolutely mind-blowing. Truly one of the greatest speeches ever written. But that really does sum up in many ways the difference between what's going on at the prison with Rick and the governor. Rick wants a place where his people are happy and the governor doesn't really care. He just wants a place where he's in control and he's not above lies, terror, and murder and torture to get what he wants. As I said, it's the choices in this post-apocalyptic world that really determines who is human and who is not. And speaking of things that keep people human, we get Glenn and Maggie getting engaged. We get Herschel giving his blessing. I mean, it's all very soft and subtle stuff. It's like last time when Glenn and Maggie, took the time to run off for some woohoo. I've been playing a lot of The Sims 3, in case you haven't guessed. Here we see just life's simple and beautiful moments. Even in a world full of zombies and crazy evil people, there is still room for those moments of family, those moments of love. We're the greater good. And with that said, folks, that's all I got for you this time. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at HoosierJedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.